Best practices for scaling Drupal migrations. And the next slide. That's it. We're ready to roll. Tell everybody, tell you all right up front, this was a 3-hour webinar that Deriza and I did back in the beginning of September. We have crushed this down to a tight 20 minutes. So let's go. My name is Eric Michelson. I'm a customer onboarding manager here at Pantheon. I've been with Pantheon for about 6, maybe 7 months. Prior to this, I was a back-end developer outside of Chicago. I am now in the lovely state of Kentucky.
And I am Deriza Spinach. I am a Drupal developer and trainer at Evolving Web. I've been with them for about 1 year, but like 4 months, like completely full time. So, hi.
We're talking about an overview for this talk is an overview for a large scale migration at the University of Waterloo. This is a lessons learned from moving 950 some odd Drupal 7 sites migrating to a Drupal 9. When we did the webinar, the most common question was, how do you estimate? How do you estimate something like this? And hopefully we're going to be able to provide a foundation on what you're going to be able to, on how to estimating with this presentation. The keys to a large-scale migration come into 5 stages, 5 stages of planning. The first being review, reviewing of what is being migrated, how it's structured, or is it really needed? You've got a lot of old content in those Drupal 7 sites. Is it worth spending the time and energy bringing some of that over? A lot of it is required, obviously, but this requires an audit with both the stakeholders and the people doing the migration. This goes into the review of what you're migrating. Planning, you're going to be breaking these large migrations down into smaller groups, looking for commonalities within the content structure between all the sites, and working with the group owners on scheduling and on when they're going to be having to do content freezes and what their expectations are and how you're going to meet those expectations. Configuration, this is where the actual migration toolkit is built. There are a lot of Drupal modules, a lot of Drupal help within this context, but this is where the actual toolkit is built. The migration is the actual migration part. This is so we do a content freeze and we bring all the content in, and then after that is the UAT. It's user acceptance testing, where a group of stakeholders, a group of people within that department go through the site, make sure it's what they want. Now, this isn't the only test. We've got testing through this entire thing. In the configuration or in the planning, we plan for tests. In the configuration, we put in unit testing. We put in the hat and Selenium testing. We're testing all the way down the line. There's a few things to review, and it's some important self-reflection that you need to consider for your budget. Are you new to Drupal, or is this going to be learning on the job? Are you bringing outside help to help facilitate the migration development or the theming development? You've got to review or you've got to work against the budget of time and money. And both of those are hard to estimate. We're not saying that it's going to be an easy estimation by any stretch of the imagination, as you'll see as this presentation wears on. And your hosting, what tools does your hosting company provide you with to help with this migration? For Waterloo, Evolving Web built the migration kit, and Waterloo did the actual migration and theme building. It was a clear demarcation. They both did the planning, but then the different tasks were demarcated. One thing to review is, will it migrate cleanly? How complex are the sites? Are the fields and the content? Will the typical migration tools provided by Drupal community, will these work cleanly? What about modules? Do you have custom modules, custom views that have got to be reconfigured for OOP, object-oriented programming, and the Symphony framework. There are module assessment tools that will not only look at community contributed modules and whether they're ready for Drupal 9, but there's also modules that will look at your code and help you upgrade your code by creating the YAML files and the route files and putting in different database calls. And we don't want to get into all that because, again, this is just the 20-minute version. Your theme assessment, we're not going to talk about theming today. Theming, there's no clean migration for your themes. Are you going to a brand new UI, or are you attempting to stay with the same UI? Again, this goes back to planning and expectations for your stakeholders. What are they going to be getting themselves into when they get their new D9 site, right? And are you coming from a panels and mapping into a layout builder, or going into a newer version of panels? Both of these, all these questions lead to complex answers.
We can say that this stage of the migration is basically like the discovery phase, right? And all that Eric just said, we could say that that's like the general idea of how it can work in any migration project, how we can do that discovery. But when we're working with 950 sites, our recommendations to get more like on Earth is like, first thing, you need to review what was previously gone over. We need to review all the status of the site by creating an inventory of those sites, the modules, the themes. We need to find out how the sites relate in regard to the modules, the content, the themes that they have. And we also need to find out how they differ. In terms of large-scale migrations, we are looking for representative candidates for the pilot group. The idea is to just work first with a pilot group where you can run the migrations, test how it goes, and so on, and then you can roll out the rest of the migration in phases. So you need first to find those representative candidates that are going to be part of the pilot group. And how do we find those representative candidates? Well, we can say that what we want to find are common features, site that has common features, sites that represent all the variations that we have in the website, like all the variations in terms of content types and field types, on taxonomies, on views, even in complex data migration. In the case of Waterloo, for example, the pilot group was made up of sites that represented the more complex migrations. And the priority used there was they tried to cover all the possible cases of the more complex data migration. And in 90% of the cases, that was related to custom tags in the content. So they had a really big number of tags. And for each tag, there was a different migration strategy. So they chose 9 sites that included all those different set of tags. So this might change per site or per case. But that's the idea. Like, you need to define what is going to be the priority or like the one that you are going to use to find out the elements on your pilot group. So once you have done this, once you have reviewed everything, once you have done that self-reflection and you have discovered what things need to be migrated over, what is not going to be migrated, then we get into the planning stage. And in this planning stage, we need to plan the migration method. There are a couple of things that we need to consider. One of them is like the type of migration that we're going to do. So we need to find out whether we are going to do an upgrade style migration and then pull in all the configuration and content, or if we're going to write custom migrations for everything, okay? Or just for some of the things, and then the rest of it is going to be manual. Like, we need to find out what is going to look like that migration. You also need to find out or plan out the migration of each content entity type. You need to map all the sources to the destinations in the Drupal 9. You need to know or find out or at least assess how long it will take to migrate all the tricky elements, or if there are tricky elements at all. And with tricky elements, there are a lot in Drupal. There are a lot of tricky elements, right? So we could be talking here about redirects, aliases, paragraphs, multilingual. If you have workbench moderation, if you have web form, if you have scheduler or panelizer, all these things are things that affect your content and are going to change the way in which you need to approach the migration. So you need to find out in this stage what are those things and start planning for it. we can use the migrations as a way for like cleaning up our sites and like fixing all the architectural decisions that we might have made. So another thing we can do here is decide what we're going to omit um, during the migration. Like, do we need to keep all the web form submissions? Maybe not. Do we need to keep all the content types that we had in Drupal 7? Maybe not. So we can find that out here. We also need to find out if there are non-Drupal sources. Because, well, in this case, we're talking, of course, about a migration from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9, but there might be the case that you still have like some CSV files or, I don't know, some content that comes from somewhere else. Some artifacts that are pretty useful and will help us to do this planning stage are the module assessment and the data transfer table. And for each of those, we have certain modules in Drupal, contributed modules, that allows us to like make the job easier. So in the case of the planning, we have, sorry, in the case of the module assessment, we have the upgraded status. And the idea of this one is just create a simple spreadsheet that has the list of all the modules that we have in the website. And then find out what is the state for those modules in Drupal 9. Like, are they already compatible with Drupal 9? Are they deprecated? Is there a replacement for each of the modules? All these things you need to find out. In the case of the data transfer table, this one is just a table that will allow us to know. Again, this one is actually a living spreadsheet. This is a living document, and the idea is that we can use it for executing immigration also, but also for planning all the things. So in here we will map all the things from the source to the destination, like all the content entities that we had in Drupal 7. We're going to put them here. We're going to say how many items we had for each. We're going to say what is going to be the corresponding entity that will be mapped to this one in Drupal 9. And then, apart from doing this, this sheet for the overview, we will also need to have another one for each of the content entities. So you can also do the field mapping. And a module that can help you here is called Entity Reports. It gives you all that information, so you can work with that one. When we're talking about scaling that, then it gets harder, right? We need to do the same thing for everything. The idea here is that you need to communicate early. We might want to keep as much as possible, but it is definitely that there will be changes. So we need to talk to our stakeholders. We need to create a migration calendar. And a couple of the things that we need to plan for are the custom module migration. We need to create the contributed module assessment. We need to find out how it's going to be the mapping, how we're going to execute the theme rebuild. We need to identify test scenarios since this stage, and define the primary upstream for all of our websites. As I was telling you before, a good practice is to create like that pilot group with representative sites and work with those first. In our case, for the University of Waterloo, each group was between 5 and 15 websites, and then we were rolling out in phases. So this included the scheduling not only for development, but also for the migrations teams in the stakeholders side. So this is, in general, what you will need to do in the case of the planning stage.
We mentioned custom upstreams, building your Drupal 9 custom upstream to migrating to. Custom upstreams are start states for your Drupal 9 site. The content types, fields, users, roles, menus, so that every Drupal site that is spooled up from this upstream, it carries the same modules, themes, and construction configuration. And this is a part of what Pantheon brings to the table. We've got multi-dev, which are on-demand cloud development with full CMS stacks. Terminus, everything that can be done in Pantheon can be controlled through the CLI for mass updates, continuous integration, build tools, automated testing. We have Quicksilver, which are script actions to happen automatically in response to activity of the Pantheon platform, including triggering outbound events like notifications or even clearing cache. And again, custom upstreams, pre-configured templates to service start states. A chart example, a chart illustration on how this would all work. On the left column, the development of the primary upstream is handled on premise, and local development. And with the AWS GitLab CI is built, dependencies, front end assets, and whatnot, and tested using Behat or Selenium, and finally pushed to the upstream repository in Pantheon. The right side of the graph illustrates the processes that take place within Pantheon's infrastructure. Such processes can either be controlled interactively through the browser or with CLI using automated scripts and Terminus.
Yeah, and all this is needed because in this stage, this configuration stage is like where we will build the foundation of our new site, right? So we can't really migrate the content of our website if we don't have that base set up. So this custom upstream is great because that way we can just build out the websites or the foundation of all of our 900 websites in one place, and then we can just distribute that to the 950 websites that we had in the case of Waterloo. So that's pretty awesome, and that happened in the Pantheon side. Thanks to the custom upstreams. Once we have that ready, we have these other two stages. We have the migration state and we have the test stage. In here, when we get to this point, now we start talking about executing or developing the content migration. The idea here is that when we are doing the content migration for hundreds of websites, these stages are not really sequential. They have to be very integrated. So it is not like first one thing and then the other. Instead, it is just a cyclical and iterative process. And in this process, we need to add a lot of emphasis for the testing. Specifically in the migrate stage or in the migrate parts of the process, we're going to be creating the migration scripts. And these migration scripts are for migrating over the content, mapping the references, migrating over the redirects and the aliases, and so on. These can include also doing the content freeze so we can do the final migration. And the other stage that we were talking about is the testing. In the case of the testing, something pretty important is, or a question that usually comes is, when should we test? And there is not like a right time for testing. Instead, we should test always, before, during, and after. So when we talk about testing before, we're talking about defining what is going to be tested during the migration. And during, it means creating the PHP unit, Behat test, visual regression test, or even custom scripts for testing the migrations that we are creating. And after, this means the user acceptance testing phase. So in the case of Waterloo, they prepared people from each of the sites to be able to do that UAT, and then we could pass over to them so we could get feedback on it. Important is the QA team should be involved since the pre-early stages, and we should be iterating over the process. All this happened in the case of this super big migration for Waterloo, thanks to the creation of a migration toolkit module. This migration toolkit module was a module that had all the migration configuration entities for all the elements in all the websites. So the way in which it was created is we received just one Drupal 7 site to rule them all. And in this Drupal 7 site, we had all type of elements that we could find in all the 950 websites. It is not like it had the thousands and thousands of nodes and content, but all those different structures. And this made it easier for us to show all the elements. We added tests for everything. We could add the key to the upstream. And even though it was one module for everything, we were able to read site-specific configuration from different settings. Okay, so in general, this is what the process looked like. So we will have all the sites. We will find the intersection between those sites, and we will use that intersection to build a migration toolkit. And that migration toolkit was included in the custom upstream that we created. Then from those sites, we created multiple groups that we will work with, and we will be working with one group at a time. For each of the groups, what happened was something like this. We have the group, we build the Drupal 9 websites for all the elements in that group. And we do that by pulling the custom upstream into it. And then we execute all the test suite from the migration toolkit. If the test failed, then we will go back to the previous stage of migrating or building the migration toolkit to fix the issues. And then if it passes, then we can actually schedule the group content freeze and execute the migration for the content. This migration is not only the deployment and the automated migration, but also the manual migration. Once that migration section pass, we will pass to UAT, where if that failed, we will go back to the previous stage. We will keep working on the same group until it's fine. And then if it passes, we are able to go to the following group. Something important in here is that all these elements that are currently in that yellow box, all that happened directly on the Pantheon infrastructure. So this is like the general process that we're following for executing all these migrations.
We talk about the Pantheon infrastructure. It's basically containers. It's a series of PHP containers, application containers, all being watched by New Relic, all controlled by Git. You've got your database container, object caching, Solar, assets. Why I'm showing you this is for this particular performance, there's 4 containers. This would be the live server. The test environment would have 2 containers. The dev container would have 1 application container. This comes into play with Waterloo when they were doing very large migrations that were starting to time out on dev. And they realized, well, we got more resources on live. Let's do it on live because we're going into a fresh site anyway. So that's why I wanted to show you this. So we opened the talk mentioning estimating. And as you can see, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to bring in for estimating. And while we can't give you exact numbers for the project that you're working on, we can provide you with an overview of what has been happening with Evolving Web and Waterloo. To set the stage, Evolving Web and Waterloo did the initial planning together. Evolving Web then developed the migration kit, and University of Waterloo was responsible for performing the migration, the front-end development. Pantheon provided tools to bring it all together. But what about the timeline? What's the timeline look like? Next line. Next click. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at my screen and your screen is what's running. All right, so there we go. So October 20, a year ago, the planning began. January 21, the migration toolkit development. April, the first release was given to the university. And over the summer, various updated releases of the toolkit were sent to the university as changes were needed in the toolkit. And guess what? The migration is still in progress. Now, from what I understand, the Evolving Web is pretty much out of the picture now because the most complex sites were done first. And so right now, it's all the easier stuff. It's all the sites that the toolkit is designed for. But it still takes that much time. And it is continuing.
Yes, and there is still support for the migration toolkit, so that part is still happening. But we are not in charge of actually performing the migration for each of the websites that they have. Instead, we provided this whole toolkit that they can use for migrating over all of the sites. Also, something else that happened in our side is like all that automation behind how to build all the Drupal 9 websites, all that automation with the custom upstream and how to bring all together in there. So yeah, a couple of fun stuff.
So to wrap this all up, keep in mind, plan. Plan for QA, plan for your sites, plan for the migration, and communicate with the site holders, communicate with everybody who's going to be touching this migration, from the UAT to the site holders to the developers. It's a hard schedule to keep. Create one migration module that's used everywhere. Divide and conquer. Divide your many sites into small subsets, and automate as much as you can. Automate your testing. Automate as much as you can.
Yeah. So Thank you so much. A part of that, we want to give you like some information about upcoming trainings that we are going to have. So in our case at Evolving Web, we have a Drupal theming training. So if you are migrating over all your websites and you don't know how to start on that theming rebuild, we have you covered. Come on to Drupal theming. It will start on October 19th. And then we have another atomic and molecular design with Drupal for December 14th. So you can see more information at evolvingweb.ca/training. And yeah.
And with Pantheon, we've got Getting Started with Drupal coming up in December. This is a 3-hour workshop. If you've got people that are going to be coming into the Drupal 9 environment and you want them to get their toes wet, this is a fantastic workshop to learn everything about working with Drupal 9 in the Pantheon environment.
And to keep the conversation going, you can ping us on Twitter, and we'll be more than happy to help. We're going to stay here in the chat a little bit to answer questions. But yes, you can also ping us there. So thank you so much.
Thank you. We went a little over our 20 minutes. I don't know how much trouble we're going to get in.
Yeah, I don't know.
We're still recording, I think. Do we have any question and answers we can knock out? I'm looking at the Q&A, getting used to the UI of this.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing.
Yep. Perfect.
And I'm going to also get out of the room. So just to talk in the chat, I guess.
Perfect.
Okay.